so happy that I'm here in this symposium. The presentation that I'm going to present now is a part of my researches on traces of shadow puppetry in my country, Iran. And I'm so happy that my friend Nasli is here and we both next to each other, because we have many same visions and common visions on this object, and I really believe that we can do something together. The title is Lost Shadows in Vast Borders, exploring the vanishing traces of shadow theater in Iran. A journey through poetry, metaphor, and history. The Forgotten Curtain. Shadow theater is one of the oldest forms of puppet theater in the East and all over the world. While in East and Southeast Asia, Asia Minor and North Africa, we find rich and diverse types of traditional shadow theater. And while Iran is located on the road connecting East and West Asia, and the Silk Road passed through the large part of this land, no tangible evidence of the traditional shadow theater in Iran has survived. Now our questions are: didn't the Iranians have traditional shadow theater, or why this type of show wasn't popular in Iran? To say with certainty that there was no traditional shadow theater in Iran and Central Asia, because we have no concrete evidence at present, is an outdated discussion. What we see in the Persian poetry and prose of the 12th and 13th centuries and later suggests that such shows were performed in Iran and that the Iranians were familiar with this type of show. Surrounded by shadows. Iran has been on the Silk Road, and it is likely that this form of performance was performed there by traveling performers and gypsies. It can be imagined that it entered and traveled through Iran with Indian itinerant performers or with Mongols. Traces of shadows in Iran. Where did it come from? From India, from China, from Mongols. We can see different shadow puppets around this country. For example, Caragos, Turkish shadow puppet, Chinese shadow puppet, wayang kulit in Indonesia, and Indian shadow puppets. According to the available documents and the finding of researchers such as Metin, the shadow theater was brought to Turkey by the Ottoman attack on North Africa and Egypt, and it was influenced by the Egyptian shadow theater, which was also carried out in some way by merchants and found its way to Egypt through business relations from East and Southeast Asia, especially Java and Bali in Indonesia. But there is another opinion about the roots of Turkish shadow play. If we consider the size of Caragos puppet and the way it is performed, like the presence of vertical bars on the puppet and also its bright colors, the influence of Chinese shadow theater cannot be ignored, and this actually shows the integration of cultures along the Silk Road. Shadow puppetry in Iran, poetic traces and echoes. We know that the Iranians were familiar with the magic lantern, forms khayal. that it was popular in Arab countries and Islamic territory. The magic lantern and the shadow theater were two different forms of entertainment and two different traditions. What is left by Ibn Hazm, 12th century, and mentioned by Fatima Sai in her article, Medieval Arabic Shadow Theater, a Laughable Tradition, the description given by Ibn Hazm in fact speaks of a real theatrical machine that gave life to the shadow on the screen, with a fast and relentlessly turning wheel to which were attached the figures that came in, went out, danced, without any reference to a muhayyal, that is, person who directly moved the figures, shadow and puppet manipulator. Like a shadow on the curtain, I passed before your eyes. It's a Persian poem. And it was in reference to this theatrical machine that Khayyam, the Iranian poet of the 12th century, composed his poem, Rubai. For in and out, above, about, below, is nothing but a magic shadow show, played in a box whose candle is the sun, round which we phantom figures come and go. And as Khamenei in 12th century said, her imagination came to the curtain of my heart, my soul became a shadow player behind the curtain of her love. Mysticism and metaphor, curtain, shadow, light and darkness, central motifs in Persian mysticism. And in addition to use of poetic metaphors from the elements of shadow theater like curtain, shadow, light and darkness, and the image created on the screen, we can also find more realistic descriptions of shadow theater observation by various writers from the 10th and 11th centuries. For example, Abu Sa'id al-Khair, the Iranian Sufi writer, describes the shadow theater he saw one night in a monastery. And it is said that one day Sheikh Abu Sa'id was passing by and a group of puppet players were playing daf. Daf is a sort of percussion Iranian instrument, and performing puppetry. The Sheikh told his servant, tell them to come to monastery, Khanaqah, tonight. They came to the Khanaqah, that means monastery, at night and set up the curtains and began to dancing sama, sort of whirling dance for Sufis. And they brought out the groups of puppets one by one, bakers, butchers, blacksmiths, scholars, and Sufis. And they had a separate verse for each group. They called them in and sang with the singers. And finally, they brought all the Sufis out and said, say this together, a wind has come into the cage. The Sheikh heard this and got up and whirled around and said, a wind has come into the cage. Shadow theater in the Islamic world. During the rise of Islam and even after that, any form of animating objects have been considered as something polytheistic. In fact, the first forms of performing with objects in the Islamic world will develop in the form of shadow plays, because not only is shadow not the embodied object, but it is metaphorical in the sense. Shadows are not physical. They are signs of objects that are not necessarily visible. Those who move them are also hidden from sight of the audience. Shadow is a symbolic reflection and representation of an object without direct orientation. The shadow play represents another world and is so imaginative that it approaches poetry, which was a popular art of Arabs and other Muslims. With the beginning of the rule of Shiite government in Iran from the 10th century, with the rule of Buyid dynasty, and the combination, it's about 10 and 11th century, and the combination of Iranian and Shiite cultures, different views on art were formed. Various rulings were made about illustrations, sculptures, and representations, according to which the more incomplete and far distant, whether it has soul or not, from reality, the more religiously acceptable it is. The first evidence of performing tazia is related to the period of Daylamite and Buyid dynasty. However, the history of tragic religious performance in Iran dates back to pre-Islamic times. After the advent of Islam, this ancient Iranian way of mourning was manifested in the traditional mourning ceremony of Hussein ibn Ali. Developing in Iranian society, Shiism has the opportunity to blend in with pre-Islamic religious beliefs. Elements of Iranian culture are being reconstructed and reshaped in Shiite culture. In the processions of Imam Hussein's mourning and tazia performances, we also encounter special symbolism and minimalism, which on the one hand shows the special form of representation, and on the other hand shows the attention of Shiite culture and art to specific entity of objects. During this period, it seems that a change in the general view regarding objects and their animation, as well as the animation of bodies, appears in the Iranian Shiite community. This issue has given rise to a variety of performing arts and non-shadow puppet forms, such as Khayme Shabbazi, string puppetry, and Pahlevan Kachal, glove puppetry in Iran. Khayme Shabbazi, Iranian string puppetry. And reflections. Personally, I see the preference for other puppet theater techniques, such as the string and glove puppets, and the lack of success of shadow puppetry, traditional puppet forms of Iran, compared to other neighboring countries in the Middle East, as more or less religious. Because, as we know, religion, Islam, has always cast a shadow on art and the view of art in Islamic countries throughout history. The characteristics of the performing arts in pre-Islamic Iran, as well as the spread of the Shia religion, which had a more balanced view of objects, iconography, and illustration, opened the field for the display of other types of puppet techniques. After the conclusion, I think I found 4 items for the lack of shadow theater in shadow traditional theater in Iran. At first, itinerant shadow puppeteers from neighboring countries, astonishing and symbolic images, but in different languages, and I think these different languages followed by lack of understanding. 2, combination of pre-Islamic and Shiite cultures, different attitude on visual and performing arts and animating objects. 3, there were shadow theater, but not as popular and favorable as other kind of puppetry. And 4, considering Ottoman Empire and as Uzbeks different arts as the symbol of hostile powers. But at the end also I need to say that there are, of course, a lot of new techniques in contemporary shadow theater in Iran from 50 years ago until now. Thank you so much.